Unicorn.
If I were to tell my younger self, the unicorn is the craziest f***ing fantasy creature of all time, I wouldn't have believed me. It's a horse with a traffic cone taped to its head. I'd never found it, but so interesting. But I've discovered this creature is a mythological enigma, a beast that outwitted emperors and naturalists alike, once destroyed Europe's economy, is potentially related to the rhino, the mammoth, and the orangutan? No creature has puzzled us like the unicorn, and I have to know why. The history of the unicorn myth is so tangled that to try and unravel it is to glimpse madness. So says historian Chris Lavers in his book, The Natural History of Unicorns, and trust me, he isn't lying. Conflicting early Greek accounts claim the unicorn lived somewhere in India. They're not all that specific. They also claimed the beast had red fur, a multicolored horn, and could, in one account, leap off cliffs if pursued by hunters, then land on top of their horn, which would absorb the shock, leaving the creature unharmed.
That's what so much of this stuff is. Oh yeah, Frank said he saw this thing.
Right away, there is a baffling amount of dissonance between the historical and contemporary unicorn, so I reached out to other YouTube creators to establish a baseline of what these creatures are and aren't.
Perhaps heroic.
Bright.
In my head, I went splendid.
Elusive. Good teeth. It's not really an adjective.
Evidently, the glittery unicorn of our modern collective unconscious is quite different from its ancient ancestor. But how did we get here? When was the modern unicorn first captured? The basic problem with tracking the unicorn through history is that the shape of its hoofprints keep changing. The Byzantine Shadavar was a horse-like creature whose hollow horn allegedly contained 42 holes, creating flute-like melodies when the wind blew. The Persian Carcharodon was a heavier, leatherier beast, likely inspired by accounts of the rhino. The Chinese Qilin was historically most closely associated with the giraffe, but has also been depicted as possessing a single horn. Fitting for an animal renowned for its elusiveness, it is highly difficult to ascertain how many of these legends influence the pastel equine of modern sticker books, but the unicorn's luck evading capture would, in time, violently run out. Around 1495, 7 tapestries called The Hunt of the Unicorn were made in the Netherlands, helping to codify not just the medieval Western image of the mythical creatures, but the now popular idea that they can be ensnared. Notably, everyone I talked to had an opinion on how one catches a unicorn.
Can I trank it?
Get candy, get like sugar.
I'm sure a net would do the trick.
Do some sort of elaborate forest-based trap.
Pretend to be in a situation of need.
Do the slow, like the Chris Pratt, like with his hand out with the blue raptor,
Right.
as it's just noshing on a bunch of nerds or something.
A lot of people mentioned luring the unicorn with candy, which is surprising for a folkloric being.
I don't know where that comes from. I don't think like the Balrog is eating Red Hots.
But what's immediately notable is that everyone stressed a non-violent method of capture.
See, I don't want to hurt the unicorn.
Though the threads of the Hunt of the Unicorn tapestries successfully ensnared the creature's appearance, there is ironically something unrecognizable about how gruesomely the detainment itself is depicted. It's aggressive, it's visceral, and like other art from the period, so detailed it could almost be a how-to guide for catching unicorns. It genuinely might have been. Strange as it might sound today, the unicorn of the European Middle Ages was simply not considered mythical. Medieval bestiaries threw them in with all their other hilariously inaccurate animals. And to be fair, had you thought vipers gave birth from their backs and beavers bit off their own and then their all over the place, then a horse with a magic horn probably didn't seem that weird. Indeed, it was something many were desperate to hunt. If, like most people in 16th century Europe, you A, believed in unicorns, and B, were low-key dying of a terrible illness, you might do just about anything to get your hands on one of their twirly healing sticks.
Their horns were both supposed to be able to cure and to detect poison. And if you were nobility or especially a king, knowing if your glass was poisoned is kind of a big deal.
A single horn could allegedly neutralize a toxin if ground into powder, or even sense poison like a metal detector, except instead of beeping, it would sweat.
The The horn sweats?
So if I had a unicorn horn and I just held it out in front of a bottle of arsenic, it would just start leaking fluid? That sounds gross.
But touted as a cure-all from plague to assassinations, unicorn horns exploded as a lucrative commodity amongst aristocrats, with some horns supposedly worth half a city, 10 times their weight in gold, 20. It sounds impossible. It was also only the beginning. The first major breakthrough in selling people unicorns was the powder. To pass off an entire horn, you needed, pulling back the curtain, drumroll please, a narwhal tooth, as their spiralized tusks do look the part, and in the Middle Ages, most buyers had never heard of them. But to pass off the powder, you didn't need such a rare ingredient, just some sort of bone and no conscience. And it was a serious hustle. We don't have exact numbers, so saying it broke Europe's economy is somewhat hyperbolic, but it had a real effect. People wanted to buy, they wanted to believe. I can confirm people aren't as interested in purchasing unicorn horns anymore.
This could be radioactive for all I know.
Does it just kind of get sort of damp if I put it too close to my cleaning supplies?
Even when I lowered the hypothetical price. If the merchant swore it was a genuine horn, would you pay $3?
I might pay $3 to have someone get him away from me.
You said $2?
$3.
$3? Whoa, dude, I don't know.
But the horn wasn't the only part of the unicorn you could market. Got leprosy? Unicorn liver and 1 egg yolk will fix it. Bad joints? You need some unicorn skin shoes, yes indeed, and put their hoof under your plate. It'll, bless your food or something. Some tried to fight these scams. In the Natural History of Unicorns, Lavers points to a 17th century professor who spread word the horns were narwhal teeth, which actually made things worse because, and I'm not making this up, back then it was widely believed that all land animals had an undersea equivalent. So if there was a unicorn fish, there must genuinely be a unicorn. And so the hustle continued. It kind of never stopped. Through no fault of its own, the unicorn has, over the centuries, become something of a commercial symbol. I'm not just talking about 16th century bone powder. To this day, the unicorn's sheer ability to sell products is extraordinary. The only fantastical creature who could hope to match its sheer economic potential is the dragon, which is fitting as the two beasts were often depicted as equal forces during the Middle Ages, locked in evenly matched combat. While today most people would bet on the dragon in a physical fight,
Dragon 100%.
We're talking about like a dragon, right?
I think it's GG 100% within the first 5 seconds.
but in a battle of moving sparkly units, the unicorn is steep competition.
Of the fantasy kind of canon, it's one of the most commercialized creatures I can think of.
A cyclops on the side of a cereal box won't necessarily help market it to children, but a unicorn on the side, the symbol of all things ethereal and special? I mean, then it's gotta be good cereal. This is also where the candy thing probably comes from. Of course, these corporate beasts would be lured by branded sweets. The unicorn has always been a natural sticker, historian Timothy Miller argues in his article, The Unicorn Trade, something that lends a sense of whimsy, rareness, and magic to what might otherwise be a cold corporate product. From the moment we first captured the unicorn, we've been selling it. When an incarnation of ephemerality is made immobile, something fleetingly glimpsed put on permanent display, said incarnation can never truly return to how it was before. This idea is the heart of Peter S. Beagle's 1968 novel The Last Unicorn, in which the final living unicorn becomes trapped within a mortal form and is therefore forced to contend with the base reality of human existence. It is a fable far darker than our modern associations with unicorns, spawning an equally grim animated adaptation which, if you'd asked young me if I liked it, I would have said yes, but I remember in my mind I was wigging out. That Red Bull monster, dude, that really spooked me. But what's endured about The Last Unicorn is its treatise on how trying to possess a symbol can erode its meaning, how attempts to commodify the transcendental deface its poignance. As Miller writes in The Unicorn Trade, The Last Unicorn could be interpreted as a parable warning against the destructive desire to possess unicorns, and therefore there is a notable irony that the book's success helped launch a new unicorn marketing craze, one that's never fully let up. And to be clear, I don't have some moral leg to stand on in all this. Do you have any idea how many dragon toys I wanted to get my grubby little hands on when I was a kid? The mass market reality that all our symbols shall be sold and resold is, well, it's the reality we're living in. But I think there is a distinctive tension between the elusive essence of the unicorn and its current and historical mercantile manifestations. Beagle's The Last Unicorn imagines a time where unicorns go unsold, but it's difficult, quite frankly, to even picture such a time. Yet creep just a few steps back from the height of the unicorn's economic relevance, and you'll find depictions of unicorns that are thoroughly off-brand and unmarketable. This is a pattern that many mythical beasts follow.
In old mythology, most things seem to usually be monstrous and evil, and then some big fantasy IP happened, and then everybody uses that as a reference.
And it seems the unicorn too was once a more chimera-like monstrosity, with the body of a goat, the feet of an elephant, the tail of a pig, and though often overlooked, this awkward adolescence offers further clues as to how the legend evolved. In the natural history of unicorns, Lavers links chimerical unicorn incarnations to ancient peoples' encounters with various real animals, and even the preserved skeletons of Ice Age megafauna like the mammoth or woolly rhinoceros. He goes on to make a more distant connection between tales of the unicorn's flightiness and Central Asian myths of wild spirits, which are thought to originate from sightings of orangutans, though clearly no trace of said animals remained in the legend by the time it reached medieval Europe.
The Silk Road was a marketplace of ideas, and very few people actually traversed the entire Silk Road, like a super long game of telephone.
That unicorns shifted greatly across cultures isn't too surprising, as from dragons to krakens, design and consistency is pretty standard for legendary creatures, but chimerical variance across unicorn depictions feels distinct. It feels purposeful. When ancient artists contemplated various unicorn offshoots, there was, and I don't use this term lightly, an element of speculative biology to their depictions, a sense that they were gleefully envisioning how the animals might function. Perhaps this is because these creatures feel uniquely plausible in a way that excites the imagination. I found it hard, while researching for this video, not to get swept up in speculating on how such a hypothetical equine could function, even sharing theories with the people I interviewed.
They have this horn for potentially predation, they might want to fight off a predator. It seems kind of fragile for that. I think it's probably more like a mating display.
It's not the best position for horns for the reasons that animals have them.
It's fundamentally exciting to imagine how such a creature might slot into an ecosystem, to think of all the variants that could emerge, but inconsistency doesn't sell miracles. If the unicorn was going to be marketable, its appearance needed to be locked down. Far from its chimeric roots, what makes the contemporary unicorn unique is perhaps its inflexibility. Dragons are not, for example, inherently one color. Some might say green is the default, but a dragon of an alternate hue is not a noticeable subversion. But ask a room full of people what color is a unicorn, and, well,
White.
White?
White.
It's white. I mean, there's nothing else.
This is not to say that chromatically variable unicorns are unheard of, but it's understood that these are a purposeful deviation. There is a weirdly rigid ideal of a mayo on white bread unicorn that exists in our heads, something peddlers had been encouraging since the Middle Ages. But this untouchable divine ideal of a unicorn did not come from a sales gimmick. These animals were once considered to be literally holy. Part of how the unicorn managed to sneak into the European zeitgeist in the first place is because Bibles in the Middle Ages made mention of the re'em, a term that was interpreted as unicorn. And if the unicorn had biblical importance, there was an impetus for medieval artists to not only depict it, but depict it consistently. But re'em as unicorn is probably a 2,000-year-old Greek mistranslation. The correct term is now thought to be closer to wild ox, potentially even the aurochs, a Pleistocene megafaunal herbivore and ancestor of the modern cow, that likely did survive long enough to make its way into the Hebrew language, in which case re'em is referring to an exceptional creature, just not a single-horned one. But the unicorn's tenure as a spiritual symbol had a lasting impact. While earlier Greek accounts describe the unicorn as irritable and territorial, from the medieval period to today, the unicorn has become so closely linked to virtue and purity, most no longer consider it a monster at all.
I don't see a unicorn as a monster.
They're not monstrous.
In post-accidental ordainment, the unicorn's dependable, cleaned-up image, compared to your typical legendary beast, perfectly positioned it to take the mercantile world by storm. But considering the unicorn's medieval religious affiliations, works like Hunt for the Unicorn now again seem out of place. Were people really down with treating a spiritual animal like that just for the elusive promise of a healing horn? Well, kinda. Times were tough. But it's also worth noting that while unicorns were thought of as real creatures, slaying a unicorn was also an action steeped in allegory. Depictions of unicorn hunts are dense with iconography, with some meant to be symbolic representations of courtly love. That's why it traditionally takes a certain kind of person to entrap a unicorn.
So if we're going mythological, you need a maiden.
This aspect of the legend has, over the centuries, linked unicorns themselves to femininity in general, with Beagle's The Last Unicorn helping codify this association by making it an explicit and meaningful part of the text. In courtly pageant narratives, however, the unicorn was exclusively male, considered the symbol of raw medieval machismo, with the horn representing, so the horn was I don't want to get into it, it's exactly what you're thinking. And in keeping with medieval hang-ups about coupling, being a maiden wasn't even enough to woo a true unicorn, with one writer attesting that the woman would also have to be aristocratic, but also not too boorish, but also not too small, and you need at least 2 or 3 maidens, one wouldn't cut it, which there's a lot to unpack there. But these weird courtly love depictions of unicorns proved quite popular among the aristocracy, further fertilizing the soil from which the unicorn trade would eventually sprout. Indeed, the unicorn enjoyed such a long stint as a respected, not-so-mythical symbol, it's worth investigating how the creature's non-existence ever became culturally accepted. Even moving into the 17th and 18th centuries, some scholars still hoped to discover unicorns in some hitherto unmapped corner of the globe, and when that failed, some would try to make their own. Upon getting his hands on the remains of a woolly rhinoceros, Prussian naturalist Otto von Guericke decided he'd discovered the bones of a real unicorn, and so he reconstructed this.
That is nightmare fuel.
What is happening? Where's the rest of the body?
Broadly considered among the worst paleontological reconstructions in history, the so-called Magdeburg unicorn manages to look nothing like a woolly rhinoceros or a unicorn. Indeed, the unicorn itself was struggling to survive the rise of rationalism, with Lavers relaying how French scientist Georges Cuvier determined that a symmetrical horn attached directly in the middle of the forehead would be anatomically impractical. The emergent field of biology was sadly not on the unicorn's side, asserting that the closest the natural world had produced was the keratinous-nosed rhino, which isn't too far off if you squint.
People like to kind of scoff at rhinos like, oh yeah, sure, haha, they're unicorns. But really, they are pretty closely related to horses.
Nevertheless, the dream of finding a traditional unicorn was all but extinct come the 20th century, but the dream of selling them found ways to adapt. If the unicorn was once marketed as a uniquely real creature, today it's marketed as uniquely fantastical. The sparkling unreality is the appeal. The distilled technicolor economics of the unicorn was pioneered by one 80s designer in particular.
There's a very famous artist that shares my last name.
When I was a kid, my parents bought me Lisa Frank merch.
The neon mass-market unicorn that Lisa Frank initiated would be imitated by copycats across the globe until it became the dominant model of the mythical beasts. It would be overly reductive to say, this is inherently bad, we have to get back to the roots of unicorns, jumping off cliffs. But I do think some acknowledgement should be made for how the intended uniqueness of the unicorn chafes against its current hyper-brandedness. And listen, whenever I make these mythical creature deep dives, I get comments saying I'm overthinking it. To which I say, you're missing out by not overthinking it. Take my hand and dream with me. I promise you'll have more fun. It is ultimately remarkable how far the unicorn has climbed on such a simple concept. How much art it's inspired, how many kings it's swindled, how many cereal boxes it's sold.
You put a triangle on a thing's head and it's like it enters the cultural conscious for all of time.
The unicorn is a symbol we'll never let go of. We know these magical horses backwards and forward, no longer liable to be tricked by adjacent animals.
Definitely a unicorn.
Yep, unicorn.
That's a rhinoceros.
That is a rhino. That is a narwhal.
That is a monkey.
That is a Sumatran orangutan.
The wonderful people I interviewed had intrinsic answers to even my most ridiculous questions. So would a unicorn pay taxes?
They would figure out some sort of like religious tax exemption.
Unicorns would open up shell companies in random Caribbean islands.
Which made me so happy. For all the cynical baggage that might surround these creatures, they will continue to be part of our stories. And I frankly hope we keep dreaming more up.
There are ways of making it interesting.
It's not in a box. It can do other stuff. You can make it whatever you want to be.
Sometimes I finish making a video and feel satisfied that I've reached the bottom of whatever rabbit hole I was discussing. And sometimes I realize there's a second rabbit hole deeper than the first that I still need to chart. Because untangling the history of unicorns is all well and good, but there's a ton of even weirder horse legends that speak to a larger, deeper mythological conundrum. And you can watch me lose my sanity trying to solve it right now, only on Nebula. Do you know about Nebula? I mean, probably. It's that stable, ad-free streaming platform for exclusive, extra curious archive videos and for extra videos from your other favorite creators. If the algorithm brought you to my channel, I guarantee you it's brought you to theirs as well. But why did all of us team up to make a creator-owned service? Well, the simplest answer is so that we could keep making great stuff for you to watch. By signing up for Nebula, you're helping to support the continued production of extra videos from people like Jacob Geller or Real Life Lore, full exclusive originals from shows to short films, and you're helping channels like mine stay afloat and keep releasing stuff right here on YouTube. And since we're creator-owned, we can also keep the price down. If you sign up with the link in the description, you can get Nebula at 40% off, which is just $3 a month with an annual subscription. And after you've watched me lose my shit while talking about the difference between the Pegasus and the unicorn, you could catch up on Abolish Everything, a hilarious new show from Nebula that is, in my opinion, the funniest thing we've ever put together. No matter what you're into, from old movie commentary to the latest podcasts, Nebula has you covered. Get a full year, 40% off, use my link, you know the deal. Huge shout out to all the creators who gave me their hilarious and incredibly helpful answers to my unicorn questions. It was a big group effort and I absolutely couldn't have made this video without them. Everyone should go check out their amazing channels, links are in the description. And as always, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this entry, please lend your support by liking, subscribing, and hitting the notification icon to stay up to date on all things curious. See you in the next video.